Good evening. Welcome to episode 42 of the Political Mike podcast. The eyes of the world are fixated on the images of Afghan citizens desperately clinging on to departing U.S. planes as the Biden administration puts a period at the end of a 20-year war with Afghanistan amid an avalanche of criticism. A 7.2 magnitude earthquake hits Haiti, killing at least 1,400 people in a country which has already experienced its fair share of tragedy with the assassination of its president last month. It's clear the gloves are coming off as the House leadership loses patience with a band of centrists threatening to derail Speaker Pelosi's two-track plan to muscle through President Joe Biden's bipartisan infrastructure bill and a massive social spending package this fall. And America's largest corporations are voicing frustration that Biden has not rolled back any of former President Donald Trump's major tariffs, particularly the duties on $350 billion worth of Chinese exports. It's in times with such major headlines like these that I'm happy to have a team of heavy hitters, and tonight is no exception. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce tonight's panelists. I'm going to go ahead and start with Professor Darren Johnson. Professor Johnson is an associate professor of law at Howard University School of Law. Professor Johnson received his BA from Yale College in 1997 and his JD from Harvard Law in 2000. During his final year of law school, Professor Johnson was selected as one of two commissioned U.S. Army officers to serve in the Secretary of the Army General Counsel's Office Honors Program at the Pentagon. He served as an assistant general counsel to the Army Secretariat for 4 years, completing his military service with the rank of captain. After leaving the Pentagon, Professor Johnson continued to practice law as an attorney advisor in the U.S. Department of State's Office of the Legal Advisor. During his tenure with the Office of the Legal Advisor, Professor Johnson advised a wide range of international legal issues involving Middle Eastern, political, military, United Nations, and other multilateral matters. In 2007, he served as the legal advisor to the United States Embassy in Baghdad, Iraq. Professor Johnson has also served on detail to the Office of the White House Counsel in 2011 to 2012. And after returning to the State Department in 2012, Professor Johnson served as Chief of Staff in the newly formed Office of the Special Coordinator for Middle East Transitions, which was tasked with coordinating the United States assistance to politically transitioning countries in the Middle East and North Africa following the Arab Spring of 2011. On a personal note, Professor Johnson was one of my favorite professors. I had him for civil procedure because of his extensive work in the Middle East. It goes without saying as to why he's on the panel tonight. So, Professor Johnson, thank you for making time, sir.
Pleasure to be here, Michael.
Next, we have Miss Alasia Bukal, who's a proud graduate of Oakwood University, my alma mater, and HBCU in Huntsville, Alabama. There, she completed a bachelor's degree in political science with a minor in business management. She is a graduate assistant at the Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies and an editorial assistant on the Taylor Fillmore Project. She studies political communication in the School of Public Affairs at American University. Alasia is a proud elementary educator and equity fellow in the Baltimore City Public Schools District. She's the CEO and founder of Forward Advising Center, where she provides academic assistance towards post-secondary attainment. And finally, she is an education and empowerment content creator. Following her master's program, she plans to continue her education in law school to continually demand an equitable education system, defend children and families, and voting rights. So, Alasia, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And another friend of mine, Jordan Strudwick, is a 2021 graduate of Howard University School of Law, living in Washington, D.C. Jordan is interested in wellness history, the emerging commercial space industry, and developing opportunities for Africans and the African diaspora to participate in the exponential growth of the technology sector. He is currently preparing to begin work for a fintech startup, Zimbali Networks. Jordan, awesome to be here. He and I serve, as we were talking backstage, on the Environmental Justice Clinic at Howard University School of Law together. So I know he's a brilliant mind. Glad to have him here. And next we have someone who's not a new guest, Professor Preston Foster, who is the founding president and CEO of whattheyshouldsay.org Incorporated. Mr. Foster is the assistant professor and program director of public policy at Oakwood University in Huntsville, Alabama, and is also a regular panelist on WJOU's monthly issues and policy radio program. Professor Foster is a former chief marketing officer for Educational Testing Services, ETS, Interactive Marketing Division, and also served as the Executive Director of Communications and Public Affairs at ETS in Princeton, New Jersey. Foster served as United States Deputy Assistant Secretary of Education in the Clinton administration, and also won a White House Fellowship in 1994. Foster spent his early career years at the National Account Executive at AT&T. He holds a Master's of Public Administration degree from the Kennedy School, the Harvard Kennedy School, and also completed executive studies at the Wharton School of Business. Professor Foster holds a BS in Business Administration from Oakland University. Thanks for being here, Professor.
Michael.
And Miss Elena Henry, who's 5 hours ahead of us all in the United Kingdom. She is currently working as a ministerial engagement officer for the British government in London. She worked for the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. as a visits and events officer. And she was also the British Embassy's 2019 to 2020 emerging leader and chair of the minority ethnic group. She's also a former intern for Global Ties Alabama and a 2017 to 2018 emerging leader for Global Ties US in Washington, D.C. She obtained a Bachelor's of Social Work from Oakland University and a Master's of Social Work with a focus on international human rights law, foreign policy, and social leadership from Florida State University. She hopes to become either an ambassador, high commissioner, or permanent representative to the United Nations, or to achieve all three. And all of that, I believe, is going to happen. So, Elena, thanks for being here.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
And last but not least at all, Mr. Egu Nwangpa, who's also not a new guest to the Political Mic, and also a wealth of knowledge. Mr. Nwangpa is currently a vice president of one of the largest financial services institutions in the world, where he serves as an advocate for small and diverse businesses, a liaison to key partner organizations, a project manager for strategic initiatives, and a manager and analyst of related supplier diversity spend data. Previously, he was a manager in the Deliote's financial services group of Deliote and Touche LLP. Egu also holds various advisory board positions at nonprofits in New York, in the New York area. Mr. Nwangpa, thanks for being here again. Such a dynamic panel and so fitting for such a week as this week. I want to open up the conversation, panelists, if we can. A lot of folks have criticized the Biden administration this week for the chaotic images that have been shared through social media of Afghans desperately clinging on to departing United States airplanes. Now, the Biden administration, President Biden has, repeatedly said he will not go ahead and take this responsibility onto a fifth president of the United States, that the buck stops with him, and that it's beyond time for us to end our engagement because our objectives have been achieved. We have obtained, Osama bin Laden, captured him and killed him. We have reduced the likelihood that the United States would be attacked again by the Taliban. And I want to get your thoughts as to whether or not there was a way for President Biden to end the Afghan war and still maintain a U.S. presence to ensure a successful departure of civilians. Was chaos inevitable as he claims it was? Anyone can jump in.
Mike, I'll jump in there. First, let me say it's a pleasure to be on this panel with two former students and some current students at Howard Law. I'm really excited about everything you're doing with your podcast. As it relates to your question about was this inevitable, was chaos inevitable? I think as many have said, drawdowns are never easy, right? And it was anticipated that there would be a period of chaos and likely a period of extreme civil conflict after the United States drew down. But I don't think anyone in the Biden administration appreciated or expected that the government that the United States had spent significant resources building over the last 20 years and the Afghan national forces would fold within a matter of 11 days. And I think what that demonstrates is, one, a failure to completely appreciate the weaknesses that existed within Afghan national forces and within the Afghan national government, and a complete reliance, right, upon the notion that these institutions were stable enough to at least carry through until the United States was fully gone. And I think what we've seen these last 10 days is this myth, right, about the readiness of the Afghan security forces and the Afghan national government really, has been proven not to be the case. And now the Biden administration is left with some really, unenviable choices. Right now, they have to deal with the government that exists, which is the Taliban. And they're going to have no choice but to continue to deal with the Taliban, as China has, as Russia has, to continue to achieve the United States' strategic objectives moving forward. And that's really an unenviable choice that the Biden administration now has. And so they need to prioritize, right? And they need to prioritize to get U.S. citizens out, get Afghans who worked with us out. I hate to say it, but I do think that we are looking for a period where there will be major atrocities committed by the Taliban, and we need to do everything that we can right now to protect those who are loyal to us. And the Biden administration is going to have some unenviable choices moving ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, thank you, Michael, and Professor. It's really great to meet you. With this honor, the work that you've done for our country and for our students at Howard. And Lacey, it's always great to see you as well. It's hard for me to talk about this because my analysis is political, and it's hard to have a political analysis about a war without it sounding trivial. But there's no good way to lose a war, and you can't manage a war until you first won it. So the only way to avoid chaos was to succeed in the war. And although we are framing it as a withdrawal, militarily, I believe it's a loss. And so when you lose a war, and the original agreement, as I understand it, is that the United States was to leave, the agreement that President Trump made was that we were to leave in May. And as you know, it's August. And so the Taliban is obviously not patient with the pace of our exit, and moved quickly to consolidate their position, given that the United States would not escalate while they were exiting. I also believe, and this is just my opinion, that, I'm also surprised the extent to which it looks like President Biden has, at least on this issue, adopted the America First mindset, meaning that we are going to do what's best for our interests, which is to pull out, to stop spending maybe another $1 trillion in trying to save face in the way we pull out. And finally, I'll say that this is the responsibility of several presidents, primarily still, in my opinion, President George W. Bush, who used, again, in my opinion, this war as political air cover for 9/11. And since then, like Vietnam, no president wanted to be tasked with failing militarily. And so President Obama extended the war, President Trump extended the war, and to his credit, President Biden is saying no more. So it's a difficult position. I think President Biden is getting out as quickly as possible, frankly, to leave as much time for the American public to forget between now and next year's midterms.
I think if we look back to Afghanistan, it's been the foil of many societies. You know, the Soviet Union spent a lot of years in there to the peril of their economy. The U.S. economy has been a little bit more resilient, but if you look back to the rise of China, it starts with our engagement in the money that we were spending over there. I would say in the Middle East there, but over there especially because it became kind of a symbol of our arch enemy. The invisible terrorists were there. So expensive bombs were dropped there. Remember, the mother of all bombs was dropped in the mountains over there to eradicate a terrorist hideout. So I think Afghanistan in itself has been a symbol of the war on terror. So there's been a resilience to jumping out. But I would take a little opposite view. I think Biden showed, if you look at, all the books on leadership, I think he showed great leadership in taking, really taking it on himself. Not once did he say, this is something Trump pushed. Not once did he say this is something that President Bush started. Is not once that he said this is something that my predecessor and President Obama put out there. He seemed to, in a sign of great leadership, take it all on him and say that, he had a lot of bad options. He picked the best of the bad options. So I think that was a sign of great leadership, if you ask me.
Professor Foster raised a good point in terms of Vietnam, and one of the commenters raised that as well. And that is, with Vietnam, you had a situation where public support was never really high for this war. And then by 1975, the United States just kind of understood the conclusion that it was inevitable that the North Vietnamese was going to take over the entire region. Now, with that historical, example in mind, of course, that was not like Kuwait when there was a clear objective. We're going to go in there. Saddam Hussein disobeyed the ultimatum. We're going to go in there because of our oil interests. I'm thinking about the Colin Powell doctrine. You break it, you buy it. When Colin Powell was sent to the United Nations to justify weapons of mass destruction or evidence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq for the Iraq War, he went in there with that kind of mindset of, if we go into a country and we leave it more devastated than it was before we got in, it's now our objective to continue. I'm interested in your thoughts, panelists, as to whether or not the United States now, after Afghanistan has now fallen into the hands of the Taliban, China, for instance, has said we're open to friendly relations with the Taliban regime. Will the United States continue to have to support, if not in the form of troops on the ground, the allocation of funds in some other way to uplift or to keep up the Afghan government? Will the Colin Powell doctrine apply?
What's interesting, Mike, is you asked the question, the Afghan government, and the reality is, for all intents and purposes, the Taliban will be the Afghan government, right? And so the Taliban is still currently designated by the United States as a foreign terrorist organization, right? So so under our own law, we can't provide a support, right, until that designation is removed. And that's why I say that the practical realities of the situation, really leave the U.S. with really unenviable choices. We're going to have to deal with the Taliban. The Taliban is the government that is in charge. For all intents and purposes, the Ghani government has fallen. Ghani left the country and is now in the UAE. And so there's no other player in town. I think the challenge for the United States will be, as we interact and deal with the Taliban, right? At what point will there be some formal recognition of what is a fait accompli, and what conditions might the United States put in place for more formal recognition of a Taliban government? We already see that China is willing to do so, right? They've negotiated with the Taliban, negotiated that the Taliban will not attack Chinese territory in exchange for China having a presence. Let's not forget that Afghanistan has very rich mineral resources, right, that are necessary for rare minerals, right, that are needed for the technology sector. And so I think at the end of the day, the United States is likely to be practical, but that is going to be made much more difficult when we see more and more accounts of the Taliban engaging in atrocities. And I'm hoping that there will be some sort of recognition by the Taliban that they're going to need to be a more modern version of themselves, and they're going to have to protect the human rights of their people, not just in word, but in deed.
Yes, sir. And in the political side, for those who are wondering, how did such a seasoned statesman like Joe Biden come to the conclusion that this was the best course of action? If you really take a look at his career, I mean, you go back to the Obama administration when he was vice president early on in the first term, especially Vice President Biden seemed to be alone in the administration in his determination to kind of make sure that the Afghan war, the objective of the Afghan war, was primarily narrowed down to focus on just counterterrorism, ending the long-term insurance policy the United States has been paying for that. This seems to be in alignment with that. Despite the developments since 2014, when the first phase of the war ended, until now, he's always been opposed to being in Afghanistan for a long period of time. And remember, 2011, 10 years ago, Osama bin Laden was captured and killed. So at this point, someone raised the objective. What was the United States objective to remain? For those who are arguing that it made more practical sense to stay there, it would have been more, in alignment with an orderly transition of getting out of war. What were the objectives at this point in the game for the United States to remain, if any?
And I won't take much time, especially with the panelists you have here today. I need to do more listening than talking. Bill Clinton was the first president in a long time that had served no military service. And now you have a president who actually had skin in the game, meaning he had sons who served. So you see a little bit of a difference in sending other people's children out to war to potentially die. So I think when you look at Biden's careful moves when it comes to military, I think he's taking more of his own situation, his own life into consideration and saying, you know what, before I put someone else's child's life on the line, let me think about what I'm going to do.
I think that I agree, but I think it's also important to note that the Afghanis are someone's children too. And Professor Johnson.
Jordan, I think your internet's a little unstable. But Elena or Elijah, you can jump in and pick up where he left off.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So I think in my humble opinion, honestly, I think America has kind of met the criteria that they sought out to do in the beginning. I mean, there's really, when it comes to the Taliban, and as long as they're in existence, there's really no telling that they can automatically take down the Taliban and prevent them from actually taking over. I think they saw an opportunity and they took it. And that kind of is inevitable. You can't really, in my opinion, and of course it's my opinion, but you can't really control, you can try as much as possible to control, but at the end of the day, they are in Afghanistan. So to me, I just think that they did what they said that they were going to do for the most part. And I think the pullout of Afghanistan was a great move. Now, the way that it was done might not be, but then again, how can you really peacefully pull out of something that already is starting a crisis? I mean, how do you do that? I think it's interesting too, because I've been just looking at other countries and how other countries are looking at the situation here in the UK. I think it was really a watch and listen type of situation where there wasn't an immediate call to action, but it was really just trying to kind of wait to see what the US was going to do, what other countries are going to do. And I think with that approach, obviously, I definitely can say, well, there is some issues with that. But with the US, I believe that they tried to do the best that they could to make sure as many people as they could were actually leaving and actually were safe. But again, I don't know, that's my humble opinion, but I really do think there's always more that can be done. There's always criticism about the decisions that are made. But in my opinion, I do think that this was a correct move. We did what we said we were going to do for the most part. Obviously, it wasn't as successful, but we took a shot at it. We did it, and it's now time to move forward.
Now I am curious. Washington Post reported that more than 6 in 10 Americans say the Afghan war wasn't worth fighting, and that that's no surprise. I mean, since 2001, when we were there, we started to see a steadily decline. The public opinion in favor of this war steadily declined. I was curious, though, was it possible for the United States to kind of remain on the ground with the support of NATO forces and have an orderly transition out of the country until the last set of Americans or civilians or allies were exiting the country? Was that possible?
You know, I think Professor Foster, I think your mute's on.
Okay, I'm sorry. Lacey, I want to hear from you, but
No, I definitely was going to chime into the previous question, but I'll just add it in afterwards.
Okay. I was just going to say very quickly, although my analysis may sound critical, I think that President Biden did the right thing. And I think he's handling it well politically by saying that the buck stops here. And by ending it quickly enough. I don't think that there was a way, as I said earlier, to do this in an orderly manner, because again, this is a military loss. The Taliban are in a position of advantage. And when you lose a war, you don't get to choose the terms under which you leave.
Yep. And another criticism is that the United States actually left a large amount of weaponry in that country and created a very well-armed Taliban fighting force. I want to get your response to that.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So Michael, this is very reminiscent of what we saw happen in Iraq when ISIS took over and roundly defeated the Iraqi forces that we trained, and essentially took U.S. military weapons and began to use them, against the Iraqi people and against allied forces returning to fight ISIS. I think we should expect to see the same thing here, right? The 300,000 Afghan security forces that we trained, they essentially, put down the arms, left the battlefield, took off their uniforms. And there is no, other than the military force that's protecting the international airport with a mission to get folks out, there's no one that's going back in to get control of these weapons. These weapons will be in Taliban hands, right? And that's a significant failure. I mean, again, I can't overstate how much the United States overestimated, right? Or at least stated publicly the fact that the Afghan security forces would be able to defend the country. I mean, for them to fall within 11 days, that's, I don't think anyone anticipated that it would happen that quickly. And we're going to have to deal with the reality that U.S. weapons are now Taliban weapons, and a significant amount, a cache of those weapons.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, but that answer really answers the question that you asked previously. What is the objective for those who feel like there was a need to stay there? There was a national United Nations report in June that showed that Taliban and Al-Qaeda, they remain closely aligned, and there's no indication that they're going to break ties. And so it kind of puts a little fear in American citizens as to what is going to happen now when we don't have troops on the ground. I think that what Biden did is the smart decision. It's the politically correct move, but we train troops. There could have been a smoother transition. And it makes me question, how were they trained that as soon as we started our withdrawal, they were the first to flee, as their president as well. So there were a lot of questions for me with intelligence as well. What kind of information and advice was Biden receiving? That 5 weeks ago, he said that there was no way that the Taliban would take control like this. And now we're seeing that Taliban is very much in control. And with the Taliban, it's very hot or cold. You don't know what you get. A report that he was talking to a reporter one day saying that we want Americans and foreigners to be able to leave, but they don't want Afghans to leave. And they get upset because they talk about how we're lying to Afghans, saying that they're allowed to leave, and they're not allowing that. And then a few days later, you have another reporter who wants to talk to them, and they're fussing at her or being very aggressive with her because she needs to cover her face. So it's very concerning now that they're in control, and it's very concerning around the type of training that we gave the Afghan government, that they didn't feel confident enough to hold their ground when we withdraw. So that's kind of where my mind is.
Mike, if I could
I
jump
wonder if you
in.
can hear me better.
Oh, go ahead, Jordan. You got cut off before, please. One of my former
Can
students
you hear
I'm
me
very
now?
proud of. Go ahead.
I'm very proud to have been your former student. To me, when he says things like the buck stops here, and that's great, and I understand that as leadership of a sort. But at the end of the day, those are words and not actions. I think that the main action that I would need to see right now is, I think that Biden and we collectively owe a duty to the people who want to leave Afghanistan, the people who are the most likely to be subjected to Taliban atrocities, but also people who just are in a situation where they're now in a country that maybe was more hospitable to them 20 years ago than it is today. And so they may not have the prospects that they had before as a direct result of US actions. So that, to me, creates a moral duty to help serve those people and make sure that they're not suffering. They're not going to continue to suffer for the next 20, 30 years because we left a mess and didn't take responsibility for it.
And Professor Johnson, real brief, I do want to pivot to the devastation in Haiti.
Yes, sure. So from one humanitarian disaster to another, right? So, when we look at the situation in Haiti, I think what's so tragic about it is, a decade ago, we had an estimated between 100,000 to 300,000 people that died. We don't know the exact number in the earthquake of 2010. And now we have, by all accounts, 2,500 that are already identified as dead, but the U.S. Geological Survey projects it could be as high as 10,000. And so I think it's important to think about this crisis in not only the context of the humanitarian crisis and the extreme loss of life and the 30,000 people are homeless and the 100,000 homes that were destroyed. We also have to remember that this all occurred within the vacuum of a political crisis, right? A country that, for all intents and purposes, barely has a functioning government, right? With the assassination of the president just a month ago, and only, I think, about 10 elected leaders that are still in office from the Senate, right? And it's a crisis because the assassinated president also had not, held elections during his term and attempted to, consolidate power by serving beyond his term. So, we all feel for the Haitian people. We all realize that the political crisis only has created a circumstance where addressing the humanitarian disaster is only that much more difficult. And the entire international community is going to have to continue to work closely with the Haitian government to step into the void that exists right now because of the very limited governance capacity at the national level.
Thank you, Professor. And the tropical depression that escalated to now a hurricane, Grace, pounded Haiti this past Monday. Rescue teams from the United States, Chile, and other countries scrambled to help locate residents still trapped after a 7.2 magnitude earthquake that pancaked homes and churches, busted roads, and killed at least 1,400 people. The U.S. Agency for International Development has rushed in a search and rescue team from Fairfax, Virginia, helicopters, and more than 50,000 pounds of equipment. And teams on the ground continue to conduct assessments. We're seeing what's going on in Haiti. Of course, there's a lot of Monday morning quarterback talk about what the government could be doing better. I want to ask you all, in your perspective right now, is the United States doing an effective response to providing assistance and aid to this country?
Well, more than you would have gotten had this happened a year ago. I don't know if that's a substantial answer, but I think there's always been this silent embargo against Haiti for its historical deeds that it's done in reshaping world history. the Louisiana Purchase on to everything that created the modern day superpowers. A lot of it, Haiti has been a major player in it. And I think the world hasn't let them forget that. They were a small island nation that changed world history. And it seems that they're always held against them, and they don't get the same amount of aid that would get even for the other side of the island that had happened in the Dominican Republic. You see a much greater and different response. So I think that's where Haiti is.
Thank you. Other thoughts on this matter? The government's response to the devastation that Haiti has just experienced. You're talking about a 7.2 magnitude earthquake that killed over 1,000 folks in that area. What say you guys?
To me, while it does seem like the current mobilization is pretty impressive, it seems like the United States is really trying to offer a lot of aid right now at the crucial point of need. I think that really effective humanitarian efforts would have had to take place much before this happened. You don't wait for the crisis to occur to save lives. You prevent the crisis from occurring. The United States has certainly the capacity to help Haiti do that, particularly in light of the history that was just discussed very eloquently, and particularly in light of the fact that the United States specifically did colonize Haiti at certain points, did empty Haiti's entire treasury at certain points, did compel certain types of constitutional provisions that the Haitian people did not want at certain points, and fomented a lot of the chaotic state that Haiti has to suffer through today. A lot of that is due, again, directly to U.S. Intervention. And so given that history, it's important to think, well, why is it that when Haiti has an earthquake, it's so tremendously damaging? Part of that is because of the geography. Part of that is because of the history, the way the buildings are constructed, the lack of, inspection and earthquake proofing and things like that they just cannot afford to do. And so those are the areas where the United States can have and could have had a massive impact. This didn't need to happen in the first place. So that really is the crux to me.
I don't know this as a fact, but my sense is that the world is kind of looking at the United States as still not being isolationist, but narcissistic in terms of we are preoccupied, as everyone would rationally be, with the pandemic. And our foreign aid seems to be tertiary at best to Americans. I think that the world is looking at the United States as having these vaccines and not sharing them, not seeing this as a global pandemic, but being basically a domestic pandemic. And so our response to Haiti may be substantial, but it's nowhere on the scale that it might be in quote unquote normal times. And I think because of that, the world has stopped looking at the United States the way it used to, as a solution to many issues. We might be a contributor to many global problems and to issues like the tragedy in Haiti, but I don't think we're any longer looked at as a problem solver.
Now, members of Congress are also keeping a close eye on the situation on the ground in Haiti. According to Representative Frederica Wilson, whose district includes Little Haiti area in Miami, the Congressional Haitian Staff Association is working with the House Appropriations Committee. Wilson pointed to security, homelessness, food insecurity, lack of clean water, poor sanitation, and healthcare as a major issue, as major issues that she expects to be included in their assessment. U.S. Aid has already dispatched 38 disaster experts from its Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance and 65 urban search and rescue members, and 4 canines from the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Department. It seems as if that that the House seems to be, House Democrats in particular, are doing something, and I'm wondering if this would be seen as adequate. You're talking about folks who are of Haitian American descent, a large portion of which reside in Florida. How do you think the public would respond to the House's efforts in this region? Will they be seen as inadequate, not enough, or is this just not a high enough priority on the radar of Americans?
This is a tough time to be a legislator. The domestic problems are so great. Around the country, I think you would have a hard time justifying extraordinary efforts anywhere in the world outside the United States. You have hospitals that are filled in Florida and Texas. Some, you might say, to the governance of those states and their reticence to vaccination or anything that they feel is anti-Trump, which would include a number of things. So people are dying and people are unhealthy. And when you have that in the United States, you do see a recoil. But on the other end, you have Joe Biden, who is trying to reclaim the United States position in the world as this superpower that is the lone decision maker and the lone country that the world can't live without. And it's a balancing act because he doesn't even have the governors in two of the most populous states listening to anything he has to say. So to go in and say that I'm going to save Haiti or I'm going to save Nicaragua or any of the other places that are having issues is difficult.
Alicia?
Yeah, first I just want to correct. It's Alicia. It's okay though.
Your apologies.
No, it's okay. But I was going to say, if anyone's comparing aid to the aid that Haiti received in 2010, then yes, you will say that it's inadequate. But I do applaud representatives like Val Demings or even Maxine Waters, who have pledged to providing assistance to Haiti. But unfortunately, the timing of this is just not great. And I mean, that's something we can't control, but I don't expect there to be a global attention to the earthquake that's going on in Haiti or public giving. We also have to keep in mind that there previously was this investigation set by NPR when they questioned the $500 million raised by American Red Cross. And so a lot of people are still a little bit skeptical about that as well. But like I said, the timing of this earthquake is really unfortunate because it's going on the same time as a growing humanitarian crisis that's unfolding in Ethiopia. And then we also have the situation that's going on in Afghanistan. So really the timing of it all is not great. That's not something that we could have controlled, but America is really stretched thin. And we also still have the pending infrastructure bill that's going on that has a lot of our legislators' attention as well. So I don't know.
Yeah, I do want to give a nod to the Biden administration for one decision that they took earlier this year that will prove to have benefits for the Haitian diaspora in the U.S. So in May, Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas reestablished Haiti's temporary protected status designation. And the reason that that's significant is we all know that that designation had been in place since the 2010 earthquake, only to be lifted by the Trump administration, right? Which subjected those Haitian nationals present in the United States to potential deportation, harassment by ICE. And so the designation of Mayorkas in May took effect on August 3rd, right? Just 2 weeks before this new crisis. And what that means is those Haitian nationals that are present here in the United States at least do not need to fear, potentially being deported back to a difficult circumstance. And, for those Haitian family members that rely upon, funds being sent from family members who are present here, that can potentially have some benefit. So I think it was a good thing that the Biden administration reestablished that TPS status, even before this this really horrific earthquake that just took place.
I just wanted to comment on something that Professor Foster, you raised about kind of the conversation shift around the U.S. kind of being the savior, if you will, for the rest of the world. It's interesting because here working in government, I'm actually starting to see that conversation shift actually happen. So, for example, watching BBC News and they're talking about how there was a report that it was told to UK government, UK troops, basically to kind of watch and listen and see what the US is doing, kind of tag along with them on their efforts. But there's been correspondents who've kind of pushed back and said when Trump was in power, actually, he encouraged other UK government, other European governments to basically spend more or raise more on their defense budget. Because, of course, as you know, the US has a huge defense budget and they kind of can. But it was kind of in that same tone, basically saying that we obviously with this crisis, we didn't have the air power, the manpower necessarily as the US does, but almost like criticizing that fact is kind of like, why don't we? Why do we have to wait for America to kind of make the first move? Why can't we actually champion the work and move forward? So being here, I'm actually seeing that kind of a shift. And it's just interesting to watch and to see how governments are really reacting to what the US is doing and how that shift is actually taking place.
So I do want to pivot, if there's no more to say on the matter for tonight, to the pending infrastructure bill that has been sent back to the House. On Monday night, House Speaker Pelosi told her team in a private call that there's no way we can pass those bills, because remember, she wants to pass this bill in tandem with the reconciliation bill. There's no way we can pass those bills unless we do so in an order that we originally planned. On the call, she reconfirmed plans to pass a rule next week that would actually cover the budget resolution, voting rights legislation, which is, key, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And she wrote over the weekend, Speaker Pelosi, that while Democrats plan to bring the budget resolution and voting rights legislation up for a vote, they are only advancing the infrastructure bill through the rule, not voting on passage. I want to get your thoughts on whether or not this is a wise strategical political play by the House Speaker in order to not just get the infrastructure bill done, but remember the reconciliation process would not require 60 votes in the Senate. The Democrats could ram this through if every Democrat is on board. And so you're seeing kind of tension brewing between the centrist Democrats and the more far left liberal Democrats on this matter. Professor Foster?
Well, again, I'm a political pragmatist, even though I'm a ideological liberal. And I would like to see the bill passed, both bills passed as originally agreed, because we're talking about the difference between maybe 3.2 trillion and 2.5 trillion. I was in the Clinton administration when the Clintons would not take a healthcare bill that would have covered 90% of the American people as a starting point and ended up with nothing. So I would take that as a win and pivot as quickly as possible to voting rights. Because if the Democrats don't pass voting rights, they won't win, even if they continue to vote more, to have more votes than the Republicans. If you like being in power, you have to pass voting rights. If voting rights are not passed, then Blacks will have very little motivation to turn out for the midterms. Even if voting rights aren't passed, if you don't put it on the agenda and go to the mattress for it, the base will not be motivated. So I don't really understand how anyone who likes being in the majority can't see that whether we get 3.2 trillion or 2.5 trillion in the reconciliation bill, either one is good if you can move from that and move to what makes your base mobilized and invigorated.
Yeah, and what's also interesting is that House leadership is also going to put the budget resolution on the floor next week and dare moderates to vote no, calling their bluff. So for the first time now, America's children have leverage, says House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She will not surrender that leverage. Do you think do you think that the centrists would capitulate to this dare? Do you think they'll fold?
Well, depends. I don't know if there's real centrists. I think Manchin and Sedema are not centrist. They're right. I mean, I don't know. I think they've proven where they stand now. I think the thing is that especially Manchin doesn't have a lot of black people in his state. So he's like, why am I voting for civil rights when that's not an issue that my constituents care about? They'll reelect me if it goes either way. So why use political capital? I think it's going to come down to him being forced in a very close vote to really pick his sides and choose and risk the real scorn of the Democrats, because the Democrats have been capitulating to him almost like he's the president. He's almost the president of the United States, the way everyone considers him first before they make a bill. So I think that's a lot of power, and they're living in that power. But I think a close vote will make them finally choose sides.
Anyone else?
Well, I'll just say again, I agree with everything that was just said. But if you're going to push Manchin on anything, push him on voting rights. If you have to concede to him so that he can say, I talked them down from 3.2 trillion to 2.5, and that's his talking point for the West Virginians, and that's the price for his vote for voting rights, give him what he wants, but hold his feet to the fire on voting rights.
It does kill me as to why the Democrats don't seem to see voting rights as the thing to get done more than anything. I think if the glove was on the other hand, the Republicans would have moved heaven and earth to ram through the voting rights bill if it was in their interest. The Democrats seem to be, more passive and more. I don't know the word for it. I mean, the fact is, look at the political drama that unfolded this past election. Georgia turned blue. We have Ossoff and Warnock in the Senate, and I think about a quote by Lyndon Johnson. Of course, he used it for the executive branch. He said, "If I can't use the presidency for the things that for huge major accomplishments, what is the presidency for? What is the majority for? If not to ram through something like this? I mean, this will change the game, especially as you're seeing states like Texas, states like Georgia, pushing through, moving through. Wisconsin tried it, but Governor Evers vetoed that bill there in the Wisconsin legislature. I mean, you're seeing states move to this drumbeat of restricting voting rights more and more.
Michael, we're seeing a lot more political courage from Texas Democrats than we are, unfortunately, from the U.S. Senate right now, right? I think at this point, if voting rights are lost, right, we have fundamentally lost a core aspect, right, of our democracy. So if there is any issue to blow up the filibuster rule on, at the very least, it should be protection of our democracy, right? We spent this week talking about the consequences of what happens in countries that have lost democratic rule, from Afghanistan, to the challenges in Haiti. We don't want to see that happen here in the United States. And if voting rights are effectively lost for a wide swath of the public, primarily people of color and other disenfranchised groups, then what good is our democracy, right? And so we really do need our political leaders willing to take whatever action is necessary to protect voting rights. And so, this is a crucial moment, and people need to live up to it.
And thank you, Professor, because the crux of all we've talked about tonight, a lot of it deals with security. You're talking about security in terms of federal aid, to support a devastated country, federal, security in terms of foreign affairs, as we were discussing with Afghanistan, but also on the front of domestic security. I'm wondering if the Republicans might try a three-pronged argument against the Democrats in the 22 midterms, and say the Democrats can't keep you safe abroad. Look at the images in Afghanistan; they can't keep you safe at the border. And also, of course, we're still dealing with the effects of police brutality. Now, do the Democrats have an adequate counter to those accusations?
I think crime is going to be a major problem in the midterms for the Democrats, because the Democrats being soft on crime has been a rally cry for the last 40, 50 years. And the fact that crime started to tick up towards the end of the Trump years, and then this year looks like on paper that it's going up. It's going to be a major problem for the Democrats unless something really breaks in their favor.
Jordan, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think, and this is just maybe coming from my very elementary understanding of Derek Bell's interest convergence theory, but when you ask why it is that the Republicans, when they want something like this done, they jam it right through, whereas the Democrats seem to try to float it and float it and float it, and then nothing substantial seems to happen, is because the Republicans know what they want. Their interests around certain issues are fundamentally aligned, particularly these hot button issues like around race and things like that. They tend to generally agree. The Democrats don't really know how to have that type of unity. It's just not there. The interests are so divergent. You got all these different communities and you're trying to represent them all, sort of. And it's just creates a type of confusion where there's no focused laser beam to just cut through stuff like the Republicans can, because a lot of it just has to do with what's in people's interests and what's in their will, in their deepest heart of heart. How energetic are you going to get about this? What sacrifices are you willing to make for it? That often comes from self-interest. If the self-interest isn't all the way there, then your enthusiasm's not going to be all the way there. So,
and that's a great point. And we need, we need, the Democratic side needs a really good marketing team, because if I was in charge of that, I would point and say, look, for instance, Kevin McCarthy reportedly exploded about the Afghanistan situation, but Kevin McCarthy was also silent when it came down to having a hearing for the January 6th riot. I mean, the chaos that happened on the Capitol. And so, being able to turn these arguments on its head is crucial. But in the last 3 minutes remaining of the show, I do want to open up the conversation to, the American companies being frustrated over President Biden's trade policies, because they thought that there was going to be a break, there's going to be a change from the Trump tariffs. Corporate America was happy to give President Joe Biden a chance to meet his predecessor's approach to China, but now they want action. Nearly 8 months into his presidency, America's largest corporations are voicing frustration that Biden has not rolled back enough of the Trump tariffs and enough of the policies enacted by the previous administration. I want to get your thoughts into why the hesitance. Is there any validity for their frustration? And if so, what do you think the cause of it is?
Go ahead,
Lacey.
I get it, but I don't get it. Even before he was elected, Biden said that this was going to take the back seat. It was going to take the back seat because the White House was going to focus more on passing domestic economic stimulus aid and reviewing Trump's trade actions. So I understand that we're 8 months in now and they want to see an action plan, but they have to understand that from the beginning, we said that this was not going to be number 1, 2, or 3 on the list of the action plan. So they just have to understand that. And I mean, there is some type of communication going on, and they are receiving hints as to what Biden has in mind. But right now, they're just not going to get an action plan. And they just have to see that Biden is sticking to what his word was before he was elected. He's a man of his word.
I was just going to say very quickly, just cry me a river. I don't the taxes have not been raised on corporations since President Biden has been in office since the Democrats have been in the majority. The tariffs that Donald Trump put on there are probably the same tariffs that Bernie Sanders would have put on them had he been elected president. So I have no sympathy whatsoever for corporate America weeping about a delay in rolling back tariffs while they're still paying zero tax to the most 15%. I just, please, what do you guys say? Miss me with that. Yeah, that's it.
Well, Professor, you're going to have the last word for tonight. I want to thank each of the distinguished panelists tonight. This was really a rock star panel. And it goes without saying, like, this was the perfect group of individuals I could have had for a week like this. And I'm very grateful to each of you for making the time out tonight. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and conclude episode 42. I can't believe it's been 42. Episode 42 of the Political Might podcast. Thank you all for tuning in.